Callum Royce built the empire, Rhea Maddox financed it, Tyrell, Ghost, Benton erased its tracks. And together, they formed the deadliest gang the UK had never heard of, until the bodies, the money, and the secrets began to surface. The Blue Line began as a whisper, not a roar. In 2009, in the neglected boroughs of South London, a group of teenagers, none older than 17, started meeting in the alley behind a rundown boxing gym. Their leader was Callum Royce, a reserved, intelligent boy with eyes that missed nothing. Callum didn't have the rage or flash typical of gang leaders. He had vision. Where others saw territory, he saw systems. Where others wanted status, he wanted power that couldn't be seen. Callum's life had been shaped by abandonment. His father disappeared when he was 6. His mother floated in and out of addiction. By age 13, he was in foster care, reading military strategy books while other boys played football. He wasn't physically imposing, but there was something unsettling about how calm he stayed under pressure. That calm attracted others. He started recruiting people who had something valuable to offer. Tyrell, Ghost. Benton was the first. A master of slipping through cracks, Ghost had a way of leaving no trace. He never bragged, never got caught, and rarely spoke. His loyalty to Callum was absolute, and he became the gang's shadow, surveilling targets, setting up safe houses, erasing evidence. Next came Rhea Maddox, a brilliant student from a middle-class home who secretly hated the limits of her safe world. She met Callum during a college outreach program. She had a talent for numbers, hacking, and creating untraceable digital paths. Rhea saw in Callum what no one else her age had, potential for greatness through criminal order. She built the first version of the Blue Line's laundering network, using shell companies and cryptocurrency wallets. Then there was Malik Sharp, a former soldier dishonorably discharged after a violent incident overseas. Malik was older, angrier, and unstable, but Callum saw his value. Malik didn't just bring muscle, he brought tactics. He trained new recruits like soldiers, taught them how to break into buildings, use weapons, and move without drawing attention. His methods were brutal, but effective. What made the Blue Line unique was their discipline. They didn't spray graffiti, post videos, or flash weapons. There were no loud colors, no nicknames shouted on the street. They wore suits at meetings, used encrypted phones, and followed a strict code. No drugs were sold in their own neighborhoods. No random violence. Every move was calculated, every hit recorded, every penny accounted for. They started small, fixing fights, manipulating security contracts, shaking down small business owners who didn't even realize they were paying protection. Then they moved into private security, offering safer options than the local police in areas plagued by petty crime. By 2012, the Blue Line had real contracts, bank accounts, and employees with fake IDs and clean records. They weren't a gang. They were becoming a shadow government. But not everyone inside was comfortable. Some of the early recruits wanted faster money, more excitement. One tried to break off and start his own crew. He vanished. His body was never found, but the message was clear. No one left the Blue Line, not unless Callum allowed it. The gang kept growing, pulling in members with specific skills. Law students, ex-cons, even a former city clerk who fed them insider data. They had eyes in city councils, ears in police stations, and hands in financial institutions. They never left fingerprints. They never left witnesses. And they never let emotions get in the way of business. People in the community talked about them in hushed tones. No one knew their full structure. No one even used the name, Blue Line, out loud. It was just understood if something needed to disappear, if a door needed opening. If you had enough money, they could make it happen. What began as a group of kids trying to protect themselves turned into something far more sinister. The Blue Line wasn't born on a battlefield. It was born in silence, grown in shadow, and designed for control. By the time authorities even heard the name, the gang had already outgrown its origin story, and at the center of it all stood Callum Royce, always watching, always planning, always 3 steps ahead. In 2014, a respected and seasoned police officer, Detective Chief Inspector Edward Fraser, vanished without a trace. Fraser had spent over 2 decades in law enforcement. Known for dismantling drug syndicates and organized crime rings, he had a reputation for persistence and a quiet, calculated style that unnerved criminals. But what made his disappearance especially troubling was the timing. He had been working a case that, in hindsight, was far more dangerous than anyone realized. Fraser had been investigating a suspicious pattern of contracts awarded to private security firms in South London and surrounding boroughs. These companies were rapidly expanding, absorbing local competitors and winning city contracts with unusually low bids. They appeared legitimate on paper. Clean audits, no criminal links, registered offices. But Fraser noticed details that didn't align. Their directors were ghosts, the addresses tied to empty flats, and their staff included ex-convicts with falsified histories. He followed the trail quietly, not trusting anyone in his department. Over months, he built a map of companies that all led back to a central hub, a private equity firm with no online presence and a network of offshore accounts. Fraser began to suspect something bigger than a single scam. He believed there was a group orchestrating a silent takeover of public security. Unknown to him, Fraser had wandered too close to the blue line. The gang had protocols for this type of threat. They didn't respond with violence right away. First, they watched. Ghost, ever the invisible operative, was assigned to tail Fraser. He learned his patterns. What time he left home, which pubs he frequented, how often he changed his routes. They planted a digital bug on Fraser's work laptop through an IT contractor they secretly paid. Every keystroke, every file, every email was monitored. Fraser's fatal mistake came when he uploaded a classified file to a private USB drive, something he intended to take to internal affairs. That same night, Ghost entered his home without breaking a lock or window. The drive was copied, the flat searched, and Fraser was placed under full surveillance. 3 days later, Fraser failed to show up for a scheduled meeting. His car was discovered near a construction site, engine off, doors locked. There was no sign of a struggle. His phone and service weapon were missing. Investigators combed the area, but the CCTV footage had a mysterious 6-hour gap. Every camera facing the road had gone offline during the time window he likely disappeared. The case made headlines briefly, with media speculating burnout, kidnapping, or suicide, but without a body or message, the story faded. Internally, the department filed the case under voluntary disappearance. There were whispers among Fraser's colleagues that he had taken a bribe or run away, but Detective Sergeant Hannah Keane refused to accept that. Keane had worked closely with Fraser for years. She knew his habits, his ethics, and his determination. When she reviewed his case files, she noticed the documents on private security had been altered. Some were missing entirely. She started digging quietly, downloading backups from external drives and retrieving partial emails that had been auto-deleted. She didn't yet know the name, Blue Line, but she began to sense a pattern. Names of executives that didn't exist. Companies with links to the same financial firm. Local businesses closing after receiving threats from anonymous parties. Her notes began forming a web that, unknowingly, mirrored what Fraser had once built. What Keane didn't realize was that she was already on the radar. Ghost had seen her attend Fraser's flat. He'd watched her enter his office after hours. The Blue Line had learned from Fraser's mistake. This time, they wouldn't wait as long to act. Fraser's disappearance was the first documented case of the Blue Line eliminating a direct threat. It marked a turning point. They were no longer just manipulating systems. They had crossed the line into total control. A silent execution, masked as a mystery, and a reminder to anyone watching, when the Blue Line is involved, the trail always goes cold. By 2017, the Blue Line's empire had expanded far beyond the boroughs of South London. What started as a disciplined operation evolved into a sprawling underground network that stretched across major UK cities. Their methods remained largely the same: subtlety, silence, and strategic infiltration, but the sheer scale brought new challenges. With rapid growth came cracks in the foundation, and the first major fracture was Malik Sharp. Malik had always been a volatile figure within the gang. His military background made him invaluable for training and enforcement, but his temperament was unpredictable. While Callum Royce maintained control through intelligence and patience, Malik operated on intimidation and fear. As the Blue Line grew, Malik began to feel less like a partner and more like a disposable asset. The organization's pivot toward corporate fronts and digital crime didn't interest him. He missed the streets, the action, the dominance. Without approval from Callum or Rhea Maddox, Malik began establishing side operations in Manchester. He built connections with Eastern European arms traffickers and offered the Blue Line's network as a channel. The deals were dirty, messy, and lacked the calculated finesse Callum insisted on. Malik didn't care. He wanted results and respect, even if it meant cutting corners. The situation boiled over during a weapons handover gone wrong. A nightclub in Manchester, secretly controlled by one of Malik's shell companies, became the site of a chaotic shootout. 2 civilians were killed, and local police launched a full investigation. For the first time, media outlets started mentioning the possibility of a new, organized crime syndicate. While no evidence directly connected the Blue Line to the incident, the attention was unwanted and dangerous. Rhea Maddox immediately raised concerns. She warned Callum that Malik's rogue actions jeopardized years of careful planning. Internal communications showed signs of instability. Some younger members in Manchester and Birmingham had begun idolizing Malik, viewing him as a more aggressive, action-driven leader. A split within the Blue Line was no longer just a possibility, it was becoming a threat. Callum acted quickly and without hesitation. Malik was summoned under the pretense of a leadership meeting in a remote location near the Peak District. He never returned. Days later, hikers found a burned vehicle, partially buried in snow with remnants of a passport and military tags. The body inside was charred beyond recognition, but authorities quietly list the case as an accidental fire. No investigation was launched. No family came forward. Inside the Blue Line, Malik's disappearance sent a clear message. Callum was still in charge, and betrayal carried no warning. Those who questioned the decision fell silent. Loyalty, once earned through vision and structure, was now maintained through fear. But the damage had been done. Trust within the core circle began to erode. Rhea, once completely loyal to Callum, started discreetly transferring assets to international accounts. She anticipated a future where everything collapsed, and she wanted a way out. She created backdoors in the financial systems she'd built, accessible only to her. Quietly, she began communicating with a legal consultant in Spain under a false identity. Meanwhile, Ghost became increasingly isolated. He operated on his own terms, refusing updates and avoiding meetings. His whereabouts were often unknown for weeks at a time. Even Callum couldn't be sure what he was planning. Ghost had always been silent, but now that silence felt different. Distant, detached, possibly dangerous. The Blue Line was still functioning. Businesses continued to generate revenue, contracts kept flowing, and politicians remained compromised. But internally, paranoia spread like a virus. Eyes turned inward. Every action was questioned. Every move watched. The gang had grown too large to control with the same precision as before. Callum had once prided himself on structure and strategy, but now he was leading a machine that was no longer fully his. Malik's death may have prevented a rebellion, but it also marked the beginning of the Blue Line's unraveling. From the inside. In 2019, the Blue Line was nearing its peak in influence and reach. From London to Glasgow, their operations ran like clockwork. Security companies, shell corporations, real estate deals, even political donations disguised as legitimate support. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. While Callum Royce remained the silent orchestrator and Rhea Maddox handled international finances, Detective Sergeant Hannah Keane was closing in from the shadows. Following the trail left behind by Edward Fraser, Keane had spent years piecing together fragments of deleted files, suspicious company ties, and unreported incidents of coercion. Her investigation had been unofficial at first, but the disappearance of journalist Nina Baird, whom she had confided in, forced her to act. Hannah believed Bard's death wasn't suicide, as authorities claimed. She was convinced someone was monitoring her every step. Then came her biggest breakthrough. An unmarked server located in a decommissioned office tied to one of the Blue Line's fake consulting firms. On a hunch, she requested access using credentials found in a corrupted hard drive once owned by Fraser. What she found would later be known in police file as the Black Vault. And the Black Vault was a digital archive of the Blue Line's darkest secrets. It contained surveillance logs, financial transfers, internal communications, blackmail videos, and asset lists of officials, officers, and businessmen under the gang's control. It was more than evidence. It was a blueprint of their entire operation. But what Keane didn't realize was that the vault wasn't a forgotten relic. It had been designed by Rhea Maddox herself, an encrypted, self-tracking system built not only for record-keeping but for monitoring who accessed it. The moment Keane opened the mainframe, a silent alarm was triggered. Ghost was alerted within minutes. Her location, IP address, and copied files were logged and sent directly to Callum and Rhea. Rather than react with immediate violence, the Blue Line decided to observe. Keane had unknowingly turned herself into bait. They watched as she shared the files with two trusted individuals, Detective Mark Pryor and a retired intelligence named Ian Mercer. Within a week, both men were dead. Mark Pryor's car exploded on the outskirts of Leeds, officially ruled as a mechanical malfunction. Ian Mercer was found hanging in his study, the scene staged to suggest suicide. For most, these deaths looked unconnected, but Keane knew better. The pattern was too familiar. Realizing she had become the next target, she went underground. Using Fraser's old contacts, she disappeared from public records and reached out to international agencies with fragments of the Black Vault. She knew she couldn't trust anyone in her department. She created multiple data keys and mailed them across Europe, setting off a digital time bomb. Meanwhile, inside the Blue Line, panic erupted. Rhea's name appeared in several decrypted documents, including one that detailed the manipulation of charity funds through a politician now under scrutiny. She urged Callum to shut down operations and begin migrating resources into foreign accounts. But Callum, always calm, insisted they stay the course. He believed the vault's exposure was limited. He underestimated Keane. In a desperate move, Callum ordered Ghost to eliminate Keane. Ghost tracked her to a rural safe house in Wales and set up surveillance. But when the order came to strike, he hesitated. No one knew why. Ghost, loyal to the core, simply vanished after that day. He sent no updates. He cut all lines of communication. Callum had lost his most trusted enforcer, and now there was a digital wildfire threatening to expose everything. The Black Vault's existence reached Europol and the National Crime Agency through anonymous sources. Within weeks, international task forces began coordinating raids. Companies were frozen. Fronts collapsed. The media started connecting dots long hidden. The Blue Line's web was unraveling. And as the pressure mounted, Callum realized something he never expected. The greatest threat to his empire hadn't come from betrayal or violence. It had come from a detective who refused to stop asking questions, and a digital file that should never have existed. In early 2020, the inevitable collapse of the Blue Line began. What had once seemed invincible was now crumbling under the weight of its own secrets. International agencies had received enough evidence from the leaked portions of the Black Vault to launch coordinated operations. In a single morning, raids were carried out across 5 cities: London, Manchester, Birmingham, Glasgow, and Liverpool. Hundreds of individuals tied to the gang were arrested. Entire office buildings were seized, digital servers confiscated, and hidden cash reserves uncovered in false walls and underground vaults. Rhea Maddox was the first high-profile capture. She was located in a luxury apartment in Valencia, Spain, living under a false name with forged documents. Though she initially denied all charges, forensic analysis tied her directly to offshore accounts and encrypted financial trails that matched the vault's contents. Her arrest was a blow to the Blue Line's financial operations. Overnight, millions in illicit assets were frozen. International banking partners cut ties with the flag companies. Rhea's carefully constructed empire of clean money was contaminated. But the most shocking arrest came days later. Callum Royce was discovered living under a false identity in a gated estate in Surrey. He had adopted the persona of reclusive tech entrepreneur, complete with a falsified university background and a trail of fabricated business ventures. When the police arrived, he offered no resistance. Inside his home, investigators found a war room, dozens of phones, encrypted laptops, and a wall covered in real-time surveillance feeds of government buildings, financial hubs, and known Blue Line safe houses. What surprised law enforcement wasn't the level of organization, but the eerie calmness of it all. Callum had no escape plan, no attempt at resistance. He simply watched as his world collapsed, as if he had known it would come eventually. During his initial interrogation, he remained silent. No answers, no admissions, no emotion. The press went into a frenzy. The mysterious man behind the Blue Line, long suspected but never confirmed, was finally in custody. The trial that followed became one of the most high-profile criminal cases in recent British history. It exposed decades of corruption, bribery, and government infiltration. Judges, officers, politicians, all under the gang's influence, were forced to step down or face legal action. Public trust in law enforcement took a massive hit. Institutions scrambled to explain how the Blue Line operated for so long without detection. But just as the final chapter of justice seemed to be unfolding, the story took another twist. 2 weeks before sentencing, Callum Royce was found dead in his prison cell. He had been placed in solitary confinement under 24-hour surveillance. Yet somehow, in the early hours of the morning, he was discovered hanging from a belt tied to an air vent. No cameras recorded the act. Guards claimed they saw nothing unusual. A suicide note was never found. Theories swirled immediately. Some believed he took his own life to avoid further humiliation. Others believed someone within the prison, perhaps a planted Blue Line associate, had silenced him. One theory gained significant traction that Callum wasn't dead at all, and that a body double had taken his place. Proponents of this theory pointed to inconsistencies in the autopsy and the speed of the body's cremation, which occurred less than 48 hours after his death. Meanwhile, Ghost remained unaccounted for. Despite international merits, no trace of Tyrell Benton was ever found. Some claimed sightings in Morocco, others in Eastern Europe, but nothing confirmed. He had vanished just as silently as he had lived. His disappearance added another layer of mystery, fueling speculation that the Blue Line wasn't truly gone. In the aftermath, dozens of businesses once tied to the gang were rebranded or dissolved. Some were bought out by foreign investors, their connections buried in layers of corporate redirection. Though law enforcement claimed victory, the deeper truth remained unsettling. The Blue Line hadn't just been a gang. It had been a system embedded in society like rot beneath polished wood. And even after its leaders fell, the structures they built, the silence they engineered, and the fear they instilled lingered on.